in Kazakhstan. Okay, maybe one last input from your side. So just what comes to your mind doesn't have to be, you don't have to be sure if it's true or not.
Maybe higher.
Sorry?
High Russian influence.
High Russian influence, yeah. Absolutely. Russia, the former empire, center of the empire. Until today, pretty big influence. Absolutely correct, yeah. Okay, thank you very much. So the topic, as I said in the beginning, is energy transition and development in Central Asia. And maybe the first question is, why does it matter for us? Why should we care about it? And I'm also not an economist. Maybe for economists it's always easier to interpretation of such graphs. I'm also not an economist, but sometimes graphs also help. And again, I would like to ask you to have a look at this graph. Maybe you can describe a little bit what you see, and then also we can maybe come to the point where you say, okay, why does energy transition and development matter for us in Europe? Does anybody want to try to describe this graph? So it's about trade statistics between European Union and Central Asia from 2012 to 2022. You see imports. So what the EU is importing from Central Asia, it's in numbers, yeah? So there are only now numbers. It's also about exports, what the EU is exporting to Central Asia. And then the blue line is the trade balance. So, yeah.
I guess the graphic shows that the EU imports more goods than it exports to the region, which also probably means that EU citizens consume more goods than they produce.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So, and what does it have to do with this blue?
That's the negative balance.
Yeah.
Imports minus exports. No, the other way. Exports minus imports. So, yeah, it's a negative balance.
Yeah. And what does it mean, like negative balance for Central Asia, maybe, or for the EU?
It means income for the countries in the region. Because the goods that are imported obviously have to pay.
Yeah. So is it good or bad for Central Asia? Or?
It depends.
Okay. Okay. So are you an economist or okay, great. So I'm, as I said before, I'm not an economist. Like, what other perspectives on this trade balance issue, especially also when you think about the topic of the lecture, development? Okay, so at least like from the political science point of view, yeah. Okay.
Maybe especially the Central Asian region doesn't rely so much on imports from the EU. So it's generate a lot of
Yeah, maybe it becomes clearer when I show you, but I think it's correct, but maybe it becomes even clearer when we show at the next graph. When you read it, yeah, so this is now, before we only looked at the numbers, and this is the last table I will show you. But if you look at the number, what is traded? So, yeah, maybe again, someone can describe what you see. Which goods are traded between EU and Central Asia? So on the left side, you see the imports. Sorry, yeah, imports from Central. Yeah, okay.
For the industry, but that doesn't require education or skills, which means when you are that is reaching those minerals points, but there is this rapidity at the point where people don't want to buy it, selling it anymore, the prices go down. There is the problem of not having diverse enough group of
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sounds good, yeah. Anyone also to comment on it? So yeah, I think I fully agree, and to make it short, 80% of the trade between, it's a little bit, I did it a little bit complicated, but to make it really short, like 80% of the trade between the European Union and Central Asia consists of importing oil from Central Asia to European Union. And this has implications for us. I think it requires us thinking also about this relationship between the EU and Central Asia, having consumed oil, so much oil for 30 years, but it also has implications for development in Central Asia, and this is what you described very well. So this specific nature of trade structure has not the best impact on development in the region. We will talk a little bit more about this development, what development actually is, but so it's a very good balance for Central Asia. So this is like our connection and my argument why Central Asia matters for us, why it's important for us in Germany, but also in the European Union to engage with Central Asia on this topic of trade relationships and energy transition. And now I would like to come to energy situation in Central Asia itself. And yeah, here to put it a little bit also more simple, if you look at the primary energy sources in Central Asia, you see it's a lot of fossil fuels. On the upper side, I put as an example the Kashagan oil field in Kazakhstan, which is a huge oil field in the sea. And so it stands for the oil that especially Kazakhstan has, and a lot of the oil is exported to the European Union, also to China, but also used for their own consumption. Then on the right side, we have a lot of exemplifies that we have a lot of gas also in the region, especially in Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan. We have huge gas fields, and both they use it for their own consumption, but they also export it to China and Europe. And then, of course, we have a lot of coal. Here, this is not only the highest chimney, it's like 400 meters high, the highest in the world. And it stands here for coal consumption. And so Kazakhstan has a lot of coal, but also the other countries. And coal especially used for electricity generation, but also for heating. And then finally, we also have traditionally huge hydropower plants in Central Asia, and they are especially in Kyrgyzstan, or not especially, they are only in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. And so they were already built in the Soviet era, but at the moment there are also new hydropower plants to be built in Tajikistan. Yeah.
Sebastian, can you inform us geographically where are these located in the respective countries?
Mm-hmm.
So Kashagan, Azli, Vastus, and the other one.
Yeah. So yeah, okay. So again, so Kazakhstan, this huge country, it's the country that has a lot of oil, and this is also the country that exports oil to the European Union. When I said 80% of the trade balance between EU or trade between EU and Central Asia, it's mainly because Kazakhstan exports oil to Central Asia, to Europe. Then here, Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, they have a lot of gas. Uzbekistan used it for a long time. This was a very closed country, and they used it for a long time for their own consumptions. So having cheap gas also helped them to develop the economy a bit. But now they are also exporting it to China. And then finally, we have the two small countries here, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, and they are the ones, they have the mountains and they have the water, and so they have the hydropower plants. That's why the energy mix, I don't know how familiar you can make an energy mix of a country. How does it look like? Like in Germany, it's around 50% renewable energies. Here in Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, the energy mix is quite good as well, because they have so much hydropower, while Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan is not really good. So this is like the energy mix where the country are today. And this is, of course, important to know when we talk about energy transition. So energy transition to renewable energies. It's very good. So if you continue to have questions, just ask me, maybe it helps to
Also,
engage.
talking about Central Asia, does anybody know what Russian is in the region? Yes, Monday. So it's interesting that the capital is Monday, right? Exactly.
Okay, I can follow up on this question. What does Astana mean? This is the capital of Kazakhstan. Does anybody know what the name of the capital means?
I think it's just capital.
Yes, it means capital. Okay. So.
Once more question. Was the city renamed again? Because it was Nur Sultan for
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's a good question. And I mean, it's a long story. So the question was named Nur Sultan in honor of the first president of Kazakhstan. But then things changed a bit, and now it's again Astana. So, I mean, I'm talking a bit about politics as well, not in the beginning, but of course, all of the states are authoritarian. And that's why things like this happen. So the capital was renamed and then renamed again. Yeah. Okay. So this energy dimension, it has an international dimension. We already mentioned it here in the discussion. I mentioned it as well. So there are these pipelines. This is very important. There are many researchers only like doing research on these pipelines. This is also a very interesting, huge research field, let's say. And this is like a simplified map. So it's not really correct, but it shows that there are pipelines to Europe, so through Russia. And until today, the oil flows through Russia to Europe. I think like this year, our German president, Mr. Steinmeier, he was in Kazakhstan. They signed again new treaties for getting even more oil from Kazakhstan. So there are these pipelines. Then there's also like a huge gas pipeline, pretty new. I mean, the red ones, they are old from the Soviet times. But then China built a gas pipeline especially for Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan, so that these states can export gas to China. Uzbekistan is currently struggling a bit. They don't have enough gas to export it to China, so they have to buy it from Russia in order to fulfill their duties and deliver gas to China. And there are all the times there's also plans about building new pipelines. It's for years there's this debates about it.
So the red is the gas pipeline.
Yeah.
The green is the oil, and there is also some yellow. So what?
That's a very good question. I have chosen this map because it's like simple, because others are very complicated. You don't understand anything. So I think it's under construction. But maybe that's.
So basically, there is a gas pipeline network and an oil pipeline network.
Yes. This map is not. It's not good for understanding the details. I think it's also old a bit. But I just wanted to make clear there are these pipelines, and older pipelines, oil to Europe. Also Russia, through Russia. And there's also some trade within Central Asia. I think, Uzbekistan also delivers gas to Tajikistan. To Tajikistan. And so, this is like this international dimension of oil on gas. So it's really, especially for Kazakhstan, export is very important. I don't know, it's tremendous proportion of the GDP of Kazakhstan is export, oil export. So it's this classical rentier state, what political scientists, they call it rentier states, so that the income of the state depends on oil export or resource export. Same for Turkmenistan. Okay, and now let's already jump to energy transition. So what do you think that these states that have so much fossil fuels engage in energy transition or not? For whatever reason, I can say you, yes, kind of. So there is some kind of energy transition in Central Asia. Actually, Kazakhstan was the front runner. They started quite early in 2013. They already introduced emission trading scheme for CO2 emissions. I think some of the economists here maybe could even explain this better. I mean, it doesn't work very well in Kazakhstan, or the effects are not very big. The idea is that if you have CO2 emissions, you have to buy certificates. So that there's kind of a trading scheme, and the idea is that this lowers, so that there's an incentive for companies to lower their emissions. So it doesn't work. The effects are not very big in Kazakhstan, but still, I mean, they started quite early, even before the Paris Agreement in 2015. They started to think about this transitional era. And also Kazakhstan was the front runner in constructing solar power plants. Here on the top right side, you see Vonoye 2. This is already like the Vonoye 2, the second of. There was Vonoye 1, which was the very first large solar power plant in Central Asia, 300 megawatt. Today they are even bigger, but at this time this was really big, 300 megawatt. This is already the second one. They are usually financed by international donor banks, EBRD, World Bank, and so on. But they did quite well, and they also have like a legislative. So in the ministry, they got a department for renewable energies. Actually, the lady who founded this department for renewable energies, she's also part of our expert network. And so they also work on legislation, on trading, on specific regulations that are necessary to promote renewable energies. Everything is based very much on this huge centralized power generation. Then Uzbekistan followed in 2016. Do you know what happened in Uzbekistan in 2016? Anyone? If you remember or heard about it, there was a quite big shift. So yeah, it's already quite some time ago. Presidents, they also had this long-serving president, I don't know, 25 years or so. A president who already started in the Soviet era, and then he died. So from one day, at least what we know, he just died. And so there was a new president, Mirziyoyev. Someone knew the name. Shavkat Mirziyoyev, and he was like, there were very high expectations to modernize, that he is really modernizing the country, and some of the expectations I think he met, not all of them. But yeah, since 2016 now, Uzbekistan is also investing or bringing in investors. Here you can see like OPEC. I think OPEC is this international oil organization. They are now funding a 1 gigawatt wind farm, which is huge. And I think like environmentalists, they have kind of issue with these huge wind farms, but still, yeah, Uzbekistan is also now trying really to catch up with Kazakhstan and invest in renewable energy. But what's important, like until today, the portion is really small. Like in Kazakhstan, they started like more than 10 years ago. So, and until now, it's only 2.5% of renewable energy of the whole electricity production. And coal is still 70%. But like IEA, International Energy Association, so there are a lot of studies, they see there's a huge potential for electricity generation, but also when you link it to green hydrogen. And I think you will have, you're the one who will talk about green hydrogen. So there's now also like a lot of think tanks are working on this, how Kazakhstan could produce green hydrogen and export it to the European Union, which would be kind of nice, I think, because for 30 years they exported oil to the European Union. So I think it would be very nice if the future is green hydrogen. But of course, there are many problems. It's also very complicated. And but this also supports this idea that there's a huge potential for renewable energy production.
May I ask a question? Yeah. So I mean, I think from this fascinating slide, the obvious comparison between Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan comes into surface as the main cross-country comparison in the region, obviously. So how similar, I mean, you already partially answered this, but I think for the students it would be useful because I mean, these are two countries where we also focus a lot, or we have started to focus a lot as an institute. So how different are these two economies when it comes to energy? Because you already implied this. I mean, is it true that, for example, Kazakhstan is a bit slower, but the fact that at the same time it's a much bigger economy, or how do these economies compare essentially to each other?
Yeah.
I mean, I think this would be an interesting.
Yes, that's a great question, and it's really interesting. Also, I think, of course, I could talk hours about it, so we could have
also connected to that question, maybe. I mean, so, and the question that comes to mind is why should or would a rentier state modernize? Why would a rentier state do an energy transition to begin with? Maybe why would the political elites that live so well and see such a wealth as a result of this rent seeking out of classical fossil fuels, why would they change that? Or is energy transition really a change or not something in the surface? So
very good.
Yeah. So
the second question I will answer on the next slide, if you allow, and just talk briefly about Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan is very different. I mean, they are good. If you are interested, I can also share articles with you about this, but Uzbekistan was really like a closed country, protectionist closed country. They had their own, like if you went to Uzbekistan, I mean, I've been there already 15 years ago. When you went there, they only had one type of cars that they produced. They had their own car industry, so they had this protectionist industry, and so all Uzbeks had the same car. They were all white. Just as one example, so they could build up some industry with this, but they also had some negative side effect. It was very authoritarian. It was a police state. It was very brutal. There was forced labor also in Uzbekistan. And then 2016, the opened up the country. It's not a democracy, but there are some signs of liberalization, privatization, investors. And before there were no investors, or very few investors only. Chevrolet, and then later South Korean car company. Really very few investors. Kazakhstan is completely different because Kazakhstan is this rentier state. They export oil. They also had some institutional monetization, also authoritarian, but they had some institutional monetization. So they had an investment fund. So some of the money they earned, they invested like in education. They have a very good university in Astana, the Nazarbayev University. That's the name of the first president, but it's really good university and not the only one. And and they were always a bit more open, a bit more liberal. So also culturally, Kazakhstan is more liberal, easygoing. Like if you go to Almaty, you think you're in a European city. So people also look very European. Like Uzbekistan is a little bit more traditional. So yeah. But there are also good articles. So if you have any, if you want some recommendations
to me, and I can post them in Blackboard after.
Sure. More. Yeah, with pleasure. Genau, so explaining low energy transition in Central Asia. I mean, there's more research literature. I didn't want to overload you with citations, so there is research about this. I only put some very important of them. So I think first we have to explain two questions. The first one is why at all? Why does Kazakhstan at all invest in renewable energies? They have so much oil, and the oil is there for next decades. What to see? This is one question, and the other question: why is it so slow? And there are some researchers working on the first question: why is it so slow? So until now, only 2.5% renewable energies. So it's complicated. I mean, just investing, just building renewable power stations is not enough. So you really have to engage in reform. This is especially what these scholars focus on. So you need a structural reform of the energy system. You also need a reform or modernization of the infrastructure, energy infrastructure. You need this large-scale investments. I mean, there are some investors. There are also some banks, but that's maybe not enough. So it's still a question, where do these investments come from, or how does the states organize a public investment from their own budget? And then also you have to continue to work on this legal framework, a regulatory framework that's also quite complicated. So like energy transition is a whole ecosystem of interdependent factors. So it is not just about building plants. And this also explains partly the slow progress. The next point, maybe it's not well structured. The next point here is why do they invest in renewable energies? And so there are some scholars debate on this question, why do they do it? And so some point out, okay, it's not only about rational economic reasons, but it's also about international discourses. And especially Kazakhstan is very well in sensing international discourses and international trends. And they sense very early, okay, that this green, making the economy green, that's very important for the image. That's very important for our national branding. So, and this is at least explains partly their engagement for renewable energy. So they want to be like also seen as a modern and green state and economy that engages with international discourses. But that's only one side of the coin, let's say. But of course, states still continue to have a very high interest in using this fossil fuels, both for their own development, but also for exporting, of course. And of course, also all the global players, including the European Union, they are interested in consuming and importing the fossil fuels. And they are still, just like last week, there was a study about banks, like all the banks we can think about, they still continue to invest in fossil fuels production. So there's still a huge trend for developing also fossil fuels. Yeah. Still, I think there are more reasons why these rentier states, especially like Kazakhstan, but also especially, do you have a comment or?
Yes, I do actually a couple of early comments actually. First of all, I think we have to define or make this distinction between reading the economy and making the distinction between overall energy consumption and electricity. Major distinction usually gets confounded. Point one, point two is market investment in energy in the electricity sector. The answer is very simple. We have big national resources. We're deep in the money in terms of marginal dollar production. And it is pure simple microeconomics, and it's the same reason why states like Saudi Arabia are investing in renewables. It's not because they have discovered a green solar. It is just basically it really frees up export volumes actually for their traditional business. Yeah. Because actually, quite frankly, also in a state where, and I was just looking at the geographic location, that probably be similar actually.
Can you maybe the first point? I think this was very important.
It's really damn competitive in terms of electricity generation. So it just makes extreme microeconomic sense to investments. And this plays fossil production actually and export. So it's to the contrary, actually, it's actually investing in their different businesses because you can grow your export volumes.
Okay, I think brilliant comments. Maybe just I think the first point was especially interesting. Can you say again the first point?
Well,
so that everybody's
very often there is a confounding the greening of the economy as a whole and electricity sector. And you were a number of times referring to part of green electricity greening, and what actually was referring to was actually electricity. Same thing here. Electricity, we have a high component of green energy in the electricity sector. By the way, it's not 50, it's more like 5. Well, actually, on the overall sector, we did pretty badly. For example, the overall economy actually, main problems actually are heating, and transport.
Okay, no, it's a very good comment. I mean, due to time, I simplified some things. So I thought about, okay, what do I want you get from this lecture, and of course I can't go in all details, but of course that's a very important point. So we are speaking about a whole range of different aspects. Like, for example, if you talk about coal, it's about electricity production in Kazakhstan, for example. As I said, 70% of the electricity produced by coal fire plants, but also heating. While oil, okay, it's also connected to mobility, for example, but also export. So, I mean, there are many dimensions, and I think you are also an energy economist. Like, if you really want to study this topic, of course, you have to work on the nuances. But for the matter of like getting a message here, I put it a little bit simpler. And second point, what you just said, I think I will touch it on the next slide. So, because there are quite many scholars in Central Asia who really promote this idea of energy transition for Central Asia, who say, hey, people, politics, it makes so much sense for us really to put a lot of pressure, focus, investment in energy transition in Central Asia. And they have a lot of very good arguments. I already mentioned this high potential. So from a geographical point of view, there's a huge potential for solar and wind energy in Central Asia. What they also, sorry for not putting here names on it, I didn't have time at this point, but this is also based on scholars who work on the topic. So they say, anyway, you need to, hey, states in Central Asia, you need to diversify your energy sources, because all of the 5 states, they only have one dominant primary energy source, like oil in Kazakhstan, gas in Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, and then water in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. So investing in renewable energy, it helps you to diversify your energy system, and this also helps you to create energy security. Then, especially speaking of Uzbekistan, like for Kazakhstan, they can export oil for I don't know how many decades, but this opposite in Uzbekistan. So they have a gas reservoirs, but they are very limited. I forgot the number. I think it's like in between 10 and 20 years, it's over. And they already have now problems of exporting gas to China, what they are obliged to, according to the treaty. So also for them, it makes a lot of sense to invest in renewable energies. Then already since several years, we have an enormous energy crisis in Central Asia. If you Google this, energy crisis Central Asia, you find a lot of articles. This summer, there were huge shortages all over Central Asia. In the winter, it was terrible, also with heating. So there are already a lot of energy shortages in some countries, only in the countryside. In other countries like Uzbekistan, even in the capital, like Tashkent. So there's just then no electricity. So again, here, investing in renewable energies makes a lot of sense. And what I didn't talk about, there's actually an energy grid. Central Asian energy grid, this comes from the Soviet times. It's quite outdated, so it needs to be modernized. But here also, like using very modern technologies, could also bypass a little bit this huge investment that is needed to modernize the Central Asian energy grid that connects all the 5 countries. So then also, like especially when we talk about coal, steam, like coal-fired electricity production and coal-fired heat, this has a lot of environmental impact and also immense pollution, like especially Almaty, for example, it's very polluted in the winter because there's a huge thermal power plant just next to Almaty. In Bishkek, for example, the capital of Kyrgyzstan, it's more because of this private, like people have private coal fire ovens at their home to produce heat. And the air quality is very bad. So if you have these apps, they are like international apps, they use satellite data to analyze air quality, and Bishkek is always, I don't know, highly dangerous to health, public health. So here again, investing in environmental renewable technologies would help a lot. Then also, especially for stranded assets, that's a risk. Like if you invest now in fossil fuel technology, but then maybe at some point, I don't know when this will be, but let's assume that at some point there's no demand for fossil fuels anymore. So then you have invested a lot of money in your infrastructure, and then this becomes a stranded asset, so it's worthless. I think, for example, in Germany, the Kommunen, they have a lot of problems because they invested a lot in the gas infrastructure, and like now, if gas would be outdated, so they would also lose a lot of capital. Then we have CBAM. I think economists can explain this much better than I do. Carbon border adjustment mechanisms. So the EU will protect their own industry when CO2 price goes up. Then of course EU products go up, price goes up. So they will protect this EU products with this CBAM. It's called CBAM, carbon border adjustment measures. So this might create problems for economies based on fossil fuels. I heard now from some Kazakhstani people, they are not really concerned about it, but at least this is like in the debate, and like if you're interested in energy, you should know this CBAM debate. But then it's a little bit hidden at the very end, like this is like the very hottest debate in Central Asia, this question of net zero value chain. So it's the idea, like when more and more states want to import CO2-free or emission-free products, then it's the idea, okay, how can we become part of this net zero value chain? So how can we produce products that don't have emissions, so they are net zero then, and how can we then become part of this net zero value chain, global chain? It's also very complicated. I'm not an expert on it. I know people who work on this, but at least, I mean, there's some positive outlook. So for Central Asia to develop very specific industries, products that could later become part of the net zero value chain.
So about you may ask the question about energy shortage. So what is the reason for this energy shortage? Is it bad planning? Is it inflation? Is it why the state is not able to deliver?
Mm-hmm.
So what is the policy state about this?
I think it's a couple of several. So it's bad infrastructure, weak infrastructure, bad planning. So I would need to rely on newspaper articles, I think, in this case. Also corruption to time to time, so things just don't work for those reasons. So.
I remember when I was in Samarkand in December, there was energy.
As well. Yeah.
So some companies were economizing on energy themselves.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Infrastructure is a very important element, very outdated, not modernized infrastructure. Yeah, so maybe that's even the main reason. Yeah, so this is like about many reasons that scholars promote, like especially energy economists, they promote this within Central Asia as arguments for their governments, maybe also for investors to engage more with renewable energy, even more than they do already now. But again, it's a huge debate. I think this investment question, it's big. I hear from colleagues in Central Asia. So it's not that people are waiting there with money just to invest. So it's difficult to get investors investing in this field in Central Asia. It's also because of political instabilities, of course. Last year, we had a lot of protests. I will come to this in the next part. But still, so it's a mixed picture, I would say. What's very important from my personal perspective, what is not necessarily a reason for energy transition, because sometimes people stress also this reason. And so when we talk about climate change, I like this graph a lot. This is like the historic emissions, cumulative historic CO2 emissions, like since 1700 something, 1751. Of course, it's model, but I think it catches some of the points. So, who has contributed most to global CO2 emissions since 1751? So, this is not, when you look at statistics today, this year, for example, it looks very much different. EU is pretty low. But if you look at the historic figures, you clearly see that it's EU states, EU28, US, Russia, China, of course. So they are the big powers who have this contributed to CO2 emissions. If you have very good eyes, you can see Kazakhstan. It's somewhere there. It's actually here. Quite small. You couldn't find Uzbekistan or at least not Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. So it's somewhere there. So their contribution to the global historic CO2 emissions, it's very low. So this is not necessarily like a reason for them to engage in energy transition. Okay, this was like part on energy transition. I'm trying now to connect it to development, which is maybe also a challenge. Are there any questions so far on this energy issue? Otherwise, we can also come back to it in the discussion. How much time do you have until quarter to 4, right?
Quarter to 4, yes, quite close. So we can finish in 20 minutes max, and then for further discussion.
Okay. So maybe to conclude, I make the conclusion later. Because now comes an interactive element, because I also want to talk about development. You mentioned before that living standards are quite low in some parts of Central Asia, in Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. In Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, for example, living standards are lower. In all countries in the countryside, living standards are low. So, and then some people, they use this concept of development. We also use it, but it's a very difficult concept. And before I personally talk about it, I was thinking about you. Maybe you could share your thoughts about it. Does this play a role for you? Development. You could either answer this question from your disciplinary perspective, like economist or political scientist or cultural anthropology. Do you use this term or not? Or do you have any opinion or just any knowledge about it? Or you abandoned this concept, or you just don't know it, you don't want it? So did it already play a role in during your studies, in your university development?
For example, political science, when it comes to democratization process.
Okay, yeah.
But development doesn't necessarily mean something positive. Development just means change. It can be also negative development, right?
Okay, so democratization is one aspect, or could be one element, or just change. Who else? Yeah. Or maybe also, if you know it from newspaper articles, also.
There's different ways of tracking development. For example, with the growth of the PAB, what is it? Bruttosozialprodukt and GDP. That's it. Or with the Human Development Index, which factors in things such as the rate of education or the rate of birth mortality, stuff like that. I can say there's different ways of measuring it.
Good, yeah, agree. More ideas? Let's start with you and then.
I think it also has to be used very carefully, especially from like a Western perspective to other countries. have so often had an up implying that your current standard of living is like the only way or is already most developed way, and all we just have the assumption, which is of course very like Western centric and generalized.
What interests me in Central Asia as far as development goes, and especially with Pakistan, is when they reach the limits of this sort of technocratic model that they have, especially in Kazakhstan, this top-down approach towards development and successful in some of the so-called higher states, like South Korea and Singapore, etc. So I how far this can go in Central Asia. You know, most of them are closed, except for Kazakhstan. The other countries have this thing where they close down the country.
Yeah.
So whether the development, economic development is possible without political development.
What is political?
Something towards democratization. It doesn't necessarily have to be democracy in a narrow sense that we understand it, but there has to be some sort of check and balance, some sort of deep structural reforms. So I guess elites can always find a way of staying in power, but something has to work, something has to do.
Okay, thanks.
That's my impression.
Yeah, I liked all comments and perspectives raised, and I will touch upon them in the next 3 slides. I agree with you. I say it's a very difficult term because it comes very often with this Western connotation, so we have to be careful with the term. But on the other hand, I think there's no alternative. So still somehow we need it, but we have to be very careful. I tried to show this in this slide. This shows this Human Development Index. This is what you mentioned. So Human Development Index, this is like index by UNDP. It's also criticized a lot, especially of promoting this Western model of living. On the other hand, it contains some aspects that make sense, like life expectancy at birth, literacy, standard of living measured with GDP here in this case. So they can be criticized a lot, but to some extent it also makes it's a little bit helpful. And we clearly see, like I put there Germany as a comparison with 0.9, so 1.0, that's the highest standard. Then you see Kazakhstan already quite big, quite high, 0.8. And then Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan would be around the same, and Turkmenistan as well. It's lower, 0.69, but it's still like higher than if you go to many African countries or even to parts of India. I think like when I worked in Hamburg, I took my professor, he came with me to Central Asia, and he is an expert in India, and he always said, why are here no people sleeping on the street? And then I said, no, so in Central Asia, there are no people sleeping on the street. So it's not this level. But of course, like the standard of living in Kyrgyzstan and in Tajikistan, it's lower. So they have many migrant workers that have to work abroad. But it's also not that bad. Yeah, so I put this, do you know the statistics about how many Earths? So once a year there's this Earth Day. So when it says how many Earths are we consuming, so this is not only CO2 emissions, it's more material consumptions. And they have the statistics, so if everybody would live like the average German, we would need 3 Earths, yeah? The same for Kazakhstan. If everybody would live like the average Kazakhstani citizens, we also would need 3 Earths. So we, Kazakhstani and Germans, we consume so much material that we would need 3 Earths. Kyrgyzstan, on the other hand, it's 1.0. So if everybody would live like average Kyrgyzstani, it would be enough. So the Earth would be enough. Also, we have to say, if you live in Bishkek, in the capital, you are also way above 1.0. And especially like if you're like middle class and go, I don't know, have your 2 cars, SUVs or whatsoever, you're not on 1.0, but this is like an average value. But it clearly shows that there is like some links between this standard of living and material consumptions and CO2 emissions. Yeah, again, continuing to talking about development, it was very interesting, like beginning of October last year to Kiev. So I already mentioned that Uzbekistan has a new president. Kazakhstan has also a new president, but he was selected by the former order president. His name is Tokayev, on the left side. And it was very interesting because he was like the first president in Central Asia who was addressing inequality. He said it was after protests, so there were bloody protests in January in Kazakhstan, and then he was starting to talk about inequality. This is also confirmed by research, so it is very unequal, Central Asia, also Kazakhstan. But he was the first president talking about it and addressing it. I mean, it will be very difficult to implement structural changes on, but it was interesting that at least he mentioned it. He also mentioned the oligarchic capitalism in his speech, and so that we have to address oligarchs. Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that's, a pretty interesting phenomenon here. So, I think the question that lends itself to what you're examining is, which of the two countries, I mean, comparing it having again the other countries, but also Uzbekistan mainly in mind. So, what is the influence of Russia? I mean, so how is Kazakhstan then, how are developments connected to Russian influence? Because I think that, of course, people think about it, ask about it, so that's it's also the comparison between Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, but also the other.
Yeah. Maybe, I mean, if this is interesting for all of you, like, and it is interesting, maybe we can take 5 minutes and talk about Russia and China.
Yes,
yeah.
Or in the end.
Or in, I mean, in the end. So if we take 5 minutes and talk about Russia and China, I mean, it has, I can give you one example. So the foreign minister of Uzbekistan, he criticized Russia at the beginning of the war last year, and then he had to leave. So he's now not anymore in the office. But this is only one part of the story. Like, on the other hand, in Kazakhstan, Kazakhstan is the only country that allowed anti or pro-Ukraine rallies. So there were rallies towards in favor of Ukraine. The others suppressed it. I mean, this also relates to the question that, for example, Kyrgyzstan is the most dependent. It's very, very dependent on Russia. So that's why they suppressed it. But then there's some small symbolic acts. For example, I mean, the president of Tajikistan, he let Putin wait for 30 seconds. This is actually a no-go. So you cannot make Putin wait.
But he did it. Other people wait 4 hours, right? Obama can wait 3 or 4 hours, right?
Yeah, but president of Tajikistan, that's I'm just saying these are small symbolic elements. But we can, talk more for. I mean, it's also connected to development. Actually, there's like your PhD candidate, Aksam. He wrote a great article on the historic role of Russia in developing Central Asia or not developing Central Asia. I would also recommend this article. Maybe you can also share it. Okay, so we have to make this a bit. So I mean, there is this inequality. There are protests. Protests are also referring to what you said. I mean, many citizens protest because of this inequality, because the living standards are low, because things don't work. But then there's also, especially like in the urban centers like Almaty, people also protest because of authoritarianism against the autocracy. So they want more liberalization, they want elections and so on. So these are the two sources of conflicts. But here, like in my presentation, the focus is a bit more on inequality. And this is very broad now. I'm really sorry, but these are whole like research debates and whole landscapes of research, like on inequality and so you have, I mentioned it even here, you have this historic perspective, Niyaz Khojayev.
We were finished in 3 years, so we were, it's not.
Okay, but yeah, but I had a very good discussion.
Yes.
So, okay. I think the working paper. I was talking about this. But then, of course, domestic institutions play a very important role. This is what you just said. yeah, this is a big question. How can you develop a country? Can you do it only top down? Can autocracies develop a country? If you look to China, you could say, yes, it works to some extent, but maybe also not. And then, but yeah, so it's a very big, complicated questions. There's a lot of research about it. And there's especially also in Central Asia, a lot of research on this domestic institutions. This is also where I personally, this was my focus for the last 10 years, this domestic institutions. But then there's now a very interesting new debate, like that focuses more on this, like a new debate in political science that focuses more on this rentier class, on neoliberalism and capitalism, and there should be, okay. So there's like one book that is now very influential on rentier capitalism, and they focus a lot on inequality, on redistribution within Central Asia, and that's currently like in the debate on Central Asia. If you go to the conferences, like this is now this economic perspectives on inequality. It's now like a big thing in the research debate. But then also, and it's very much related to world market integration. Again, here, I think economists have to say a lot about this, but this political science interventions, like if the argument is, hey, come on, I mean, the world market gave us this position of oil producer, so we didn't have another chance to do something else. So if you could have produced goods or built up an industry, our situation would be very much different today. Maybe we wouldn't even have autocratic systems, but more liberalized systems, and we would have an industry. So this is a debate, and I think here interdisciplinary exchange makes a lot of sense between economists, political scientists, also cultural studies. Just mentioning it, this is like a big debate at the moment. Now coming already to the end. So if you combine this energy transition and development, like improving living standards or improving development, however you define it. So I think there are some common patterns based on the literature. So what's needed for energy transition and development? Public and private investments is needed, which lacks in Central Asia. Then if you look more on the governmental level, policy level, like at least based also on literature, so science-based policy making, data-based policy making and strategies. It's very important that you really know what you're doing and why you are doing it. Functioning state institutions. Yeah, if democratization is necessary or not, it's an interesting question. But at least, I mean, the state plays obviously an important role in modernizing the economy, energy transition and development. So you need some kind of functioning state institutions. And then like this is now what we work especially on intersectoral coordinations. So the main idea is that you have the sectors in a society, so you have the state, then you have the economy, then you have the private sector, the civil society. And these decisions that have to be made for energy transition, but also for development, they are so big and they touch on all levels of the society that no actor alone can make decisions and implement decisions. So that's why there's this coordination is necessary. So state has to work together with business and with civil society. It has to coordinate it. This is like called intersectoral coordination. I mean, this is again a Western perspective, but I think it also makes a lot of sense for Central Asia. And but then also, I said it's difficult to speak about democratization, but I think what's kind of clear is you cannot make everything top down. Even autocracies cannot make everything top down. So you need to have bottom up processes for technological innovations, but also for social innovations. Yeah. So a lot has to do how we live, how we organize our lives. So here we need social innovations, and this is also needed for energy transition and development. So these are some requirements, but then if you look at how things are organized at the moment, we still have a dominance of these top-down processes on the domestic level. So they struggle a little bit with incorporating bottom-up processes. I mean, there are experiments in all states. For example, they have public councils, or they also have like city planning, participatory city planning, and so on. So there are some innovations. But also, if you look at the international level, how development cooperation is organized, it's very top-down. So it means that like officials in Berlin, for example, they discuss with officials in Tashkent, and then they make a plan, and then it's implemented. So it's very top-down. In some cases, this also works very well, and the effects are okay. But again, here, I think also on the international level, more top-down, bottom-up is needed. And then another problem is that policy making in the states, it's very often based on external knowledge production and external consulting. So they hire sometimes the World Bank, sometimes also PricewaterhouseCoopers. They are paid for making a study. Then they come in with some experts. They do a study. Here's the study. Then this is the base for policy making. And I think that's very bad because local knowledge is missing. Also, local knowledge production institutions doesn't benefit from this processes. So I think here's also a problem. And yeah, this is what I mentioned, limited space for bottom-up processes. And then finally, also this reflects to what you said on this Western dominance still of Western ideas. I mean, of course, they develop their own ideas, but this is also like a big debate at the moment. And from my point of view, it catches important points. I don't agree with all of what they say. I just put some quote here. So this, yeah, the idea of decolonizing Central Asia. So it means that they are still kind of captured or caught in a, yeah, post or neo-colonial sitting where the ideas come from the outside, but not from the inside. And this is like also now a very big debate in Central Asian studies about how to decolonize Central Asian relations and studies. Okay. I had a part on what we are actually doing, but maybe we can, yeah, maybe very briefly. So, because I mean, we are like practitioners, so we are not, I mean, we are also researchers, but also practitioners, so we have to adapt to the circumstances. We cannot change the system, especially I cannot do it, I also don't want it. So, but our idea is what can we do within this very difficult setting? So how can we, for example, bring states to incorporate more bottom-up processes? And maybe it's a little bit too long. So we are doing Living Lab. This is a research method, Living Labs, where researchers test innovations together with other stakeholders, like states or officials or citizens. And this is like the description. Maybe I immediately show you what we do. For example, we had a pilot Living Lab in Bishkek. The idea was that Bishkek, city Bishkek, they already have a cycling grid. This is, you can see it. Well, actually, the green one, it's not so big, but they plan to expand it. So this is like the official plan to expand the cycling grid. And so our idea was to provide them data of how to do it better, how to make it safer, how to make it more comfortable, and how to bring people to really use the cycling grid. And we were working together with an NGO. They already work on cycling promotion. It's the two ladies here, Bishkek Pishkom. By the way, this is a picture, it's from Uzbekistan, but a picture from '69. It's called Family Morning. So as you see, cycling has some tradition also from Soviet times. And then the Living Lab, yeah, it looks like this, that you really go out in the street. It's in a real world setting. So this is like in the center, it's a German professor. He is the Kyrgyz professors, left and right. And then there's an engineer from the city administration and the NGO. They were also part of it. And then we were developing this idea. And this is how we designed the idea. And so the idea is like to test things, to test innovations, to monitor it, and then you have data. Does it work or does it not work? And before you spend millions of euros, you can test it, and then you know it works or it doesn't work. So this is like the basic idea. We have this on mobility, but also on energy transition, and we work there on decentralized energy system, because at the moment this is not yet in the focus of the governments. They have this focus on this huge power plants, and we want to help to focus more on decentralized community-based energy systems. Yeah, and then we work with a lot of organizations. So this is now just a pilot lab in Bishkek. So we have like local international NGOs, universities, and here city administration as well. So that's it. Thanks so much.
So now we have time for questions. So